Hey Student Success, this is your lecture video for Chapter 4. So we're going to hop right in. The textbook link is right here, opens up right to your textbook, and then there is a slideshow that I will be working off of for the majority of the lecture. All right, so Chapter 4 is about listening, taking notes, and remembering. Make sure that you go back and watch the assignment video that is associated with this chapter so that you can correlate the two together as needed. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through. So the big things from the Chapter 4 takeaway is that just starting to view, especially if you are currently in high school, if you are a recent high school graduate, or maybe it's just been a little while since you've been in a college atmosphere, that college is different from high school and you need to approach it as such, that there's a lot of self-responsibility in learning, especially with an online class. And the key to time management is being a success component to college overall success, as well as their learning cycle. So these are some big Chapter 4 takeaways. So let's talk about being prepared. So although on this slide here it says physically, sometimes we think about that with lecture, like in-person lecture classes. These can also apply to if you're sitting at home listening to lectures for online classes. So how do you get ready for class? Well, mentally, going into every class, whether it's face-to-face or online, you're about to listen to a lecture. What do you want to get out of this? You know, what is the main idea? Look at the syllabus. What chapter is going to be covered? What concepts are there going to be discussing? How is it going to help me in the course? And then, you know, big picture, how is it going to help me in my field? Physically, make sure that you're rested. You have the nutrition, the drinks, all that kind of stuff. You have materials. If you're listening to an online lecture, maybe you have a notebook beside you, you have earbuds, whatever that might look like for you. And then the same thing for an actual face-to-face class. You have your materials. Make sure that you're giving yourself time to be in class. Make sure that the distractions are put away, whether again that's in class or at your home, you know, desk or whatever that might look like. So making sure you're prepared for class. Also, listening at lectures. Again, whether you are listening to an online lecture or you're sitting in a classroom space, making sure you're in the right mental space. You know, are you free as possible anyway of distractions? You know, did you review material from a previous lecture to see how it can be connected? Did you read the information before class? Because that's one fantastic way to help not only like reading comprehension, but also focus and note-taking is if you know a lecture you're about to attend or listen to is over a certain chapter, read the chapter first. It gives you some background knowledge. It helps prepare yourself to receive new information or to maybe clarify anything that was confusing on your own reading. If you're in a physical classroom space, you know, sitting toward the room, eye contact, that is helpful for listening, making sure that you're focusing on what is being said. If your phone is a distraction, which it is for many people, myself included sometimes, you know, making sure that it's tucked away or it's on, you know, obviously not like on the highest ring that it could be on. Making sure that you are trying to keep your mind as clear as possible for new ideas, and then look for signals, even if it's just over the recording like we are now. If your instructor starts to raise their voice or to speak a little bit more quickly because they're trying to emphasize something, or if they put something on the board if you're in front of them, you know, how they emphasize that or how, you know, what words are going on the boards. These are all tips on how to make sure that you are getting the best out of a lecture in class. Also, what is not being said? This goes back to, you know, hey, if you read the chapter before the lecture and the instructor does not cover a certain section or they only kind of breeze through it, that lets you know that, hey, this probably isn't quite as important as these other sections. Decide what is important and what is not throughout your notes. You know, put down the main ideas, which leads to note-taking, which we're going to talk a little bit about note-taking in this chapter as well. The different methods of note-taking, what is going to be most helpful to you, how are you going to organize those notes? And then asking questions. It's so important to ask questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking in class, send an email after class, stay after class, get there early, just do something because, I mean, you're paying for this education. You want to make sure that you're getting the most out of it, and asking questions is so helpful for listening, for note-taking, for comprehension, for engagement, for motivation. I mean, so many things. And then recording lectures. Oftentimes you can record, you want to ask permission from the instructor first, but that is a great way to make sure that you don't feel like you have to capture every single little detail while the lecture is going on. You can go back and listen and take notes off of the recording if needed. Now, what to do if these situations occur? Like if you feel like there's a situation where the instructor is speaking too quickly, there's a heavy accent, there's some mumbling. So things like, you know, asking for them to repeat, visit them in their office hours, check in with another student to see if there's anything that they got that you did not. So, different situations you can check in and tips on what to do in those cases. All right, so note taking. So if you are a type of learner, so we talked about learning styles with earlier chapters. If you are a type of learner who does not necessarily need to take notes, that's okay. That doesn't mean you should never take notes, because there are certain things that you should jot down to go back and look at later. But in general, taking notes is important because it does support listening. So especially if you are a read-write type learner or a visual learner, where you can put notes in a way that are going to visually appeal to you, it allows you to support your listening, to go back and test yourself on the information, remember key ideas, and it creates a study guide. And we're going to talk about different types of note taking here in just a moment. This section is rather small in the slideshow. That's why if you go into the text, you can see it a little bit better. I'm going to go here to this section where it says got notes. And it's going to replicate. There we go. You can probably see it a little bit better here. So this is going to go through different types of note taking. So lists is just what it sounds like short phrases, bullet points. Outlines are really structured. Some people like this because they think as like a writer and they like to have outlines. Concept maps, if you are a visual person, the concept map is going to be a great method for you to see that in a visual way, to see relationships. And then Cornell Method, if you struggle with organization with your notes, Cornell Method is a great way. And if you scroll down, it's going to give you examples of what each of those look like. So here's like the list method. Here's what outlines look like. Concept map for those visual learners. And then Cornell Method. I really like Cornell Method, where you, on the left-hand side, you kind of divide your paper. On the left-hand side, you write down a phrase, a term, a question, whatever it might be. You can see it's like a shorter piece of writing. On the right-hand side, then you answer the question. You go into detail about the concept. You define the term. And then at the bottom, you kind of summarize maybe what you learned up in here. And it really does set up like a nice almost study guide for you. So it is a great method, especially if you struggle with note-taking to begin with. So I encourage you to take a look at those different types. And then in our materials folder, there's also a link to note-taking applications online if you prefer to take notes in that fashion. Some people like to type them or take note-taking applications. Some other general note-taking tips, regardless of what method you use, be prepared, meaning again, maybe you read the chapter ahead of time, have the materials ready to take your notes on, label. I learned that the hard way really early on as an undergrad. Label and date all your notes. Don't assume you're going to remember what day they came from. Make sure that you're not trying to capture every single word that instructor says. That's not possible. Pull out the keywords, copy the things from the slides or the board, abbreviate as needed, have your own kind of shorthand or ways to keep track whenever you have a question. Put things in quotes if it's coming directly word for word from the textbook or from the instructor, so you know it wasn't your words, it was the textbook's words. Review your notes as soon as possible after class, usually right after class if you can, so that if you miss something or something doesn't make sense, you can address it pretty quickly, and then it also helps kind of solidify the information. And then if you can put things into your own words afterwards, that's also a great way to make sure that you have learned the material. Here's some other just basic things the chapter talks about, like what if you miss class? Some of this might sound like common sense, but check to see. Sometimes your instructor teaches the same class Monday, Wednesday, and then they teach it Tuesday, Thursday. Maybe you can attend the Tuesday, Thursday if you had a doctor's appointment or something. It's always worth asking. See if they post their lectures online. See if you can borrow notes from a classmate, and then always check your syllabus to see what was covered so you know exactly what was going on that day. And then the chapter also talks about memory, how to convert information from kind of short-term to long-term memory, which is the goal for just about everything we're doing here, right? So you want to be deliberate and very thorough and thoughtful in the decisions that you're making when it comes to what you're trying to remember. So like, I'm going to specifically remember this concept from chapter 4. Be deliberate in that. Make connections, create connections, come up with examples, anything that's going to connect it to your everyday life. Try to think about what you already know about the subject and then connect it to what you're learning about it. Visualize it if you're a mental visual person, if that is helpful. Break down it into manageable chunks, meaning don't try to memorize 15 things at once. Chunk it down, break it down a little bit. Eliminate distractions. If we are trying to remember a study in an environment that is very chaotic, it's going to be very difficult for us. Repeat information and have a nice place and location to get that information from. All right, so as I have before, I encourage you to get into your actual chapter and look at the sections that you could most benefit from. One of the things, from the very beginning, give yourself these self-assessments. What is going on in the chapter? Where do I stand now? Self-assess. Give yourself some goals. Thinking about high school and how it's different from college. Like, this is another thing you want to be aware of. It's going to talk about how it's expected. Our note-taking, our learning, all of that is different from high school to college. So really, again, go into the text, look through the sections of the chapter, and really hone in on anything that you feel like you could benefit from most. Maybe all of it is going to be beneficial, or maybe you really struggle with note-taking, or your memory is, you have some faulty issues with converting memory from short-term to long-term. So I encourage you to go in, look at the sections in our slideshow, spend some time in our textbook, get to know it a little bit more, and then you'll see that the chapter assignments connected to this chapter deal with listening, note-taking, remembering, so you'll have to go back and revisit this section anyway so that you can complete the assignment. So if you have any questions over Chapter 4, please reach out. And again, remember, with an online class, a lot of the learning does fall on your kind of shoulders to listen to these lectures, to listen to the material presented, but then dig a little deeper on your own, especially as it applies to you and what you need the most from. All right, until next time, bye.